When it comes to the Detroit Lions, over the last couple of years, there is a certain type of player that they're looking for. And the one that we're going to be talking about today is quintessentially a Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell-esque player. Stay tuned, everybody.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. It doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike, and as always, we're diving on in. Here's the thing, folks. The more and more that I have spent my time looking at draft prospects, the more and more that I have spent time thinking, analyzing, rationalizing, whatever term it is you would like to use to try and get a gauge of different types of prospects that could really be ones that are interested for the Lions, or rather I should say, how do I put this? Are interesting for the Lions, ones that the Lions are interested in, pardon me, I had the words backed up there, is definitely something that is a very intriguing prospect because trying to get into the mind of Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell is a very challenging, but it's also a very rewarding opportunity because it's like, okay, I'm trying to see what these types of prospects could be for what they are and what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell are seeing them as they are. And when you think about it, for Lions fans, the fact that the draft is literally almost here, like we're about a week away, folks, from the draft, because the draft starts next Thursday, and it's Tuesday of this week, so we're literally like 9 days away. When you think about it, the draft, the wait for it, it's an exciting time, but it's also an excruciating time because the best way I can put it is like waiting for the draft is kind of like for the football fan, it's kind of like being a kid when you're growing up and you're waiting for your birthday or you're waiting for Christmas to come around. It only happens once a year and you're waiting earnestly for it and you just absolutely cannot wait once you know that it's right there. And you hope that you're going to get something good for whatever the occasion is. You just don't know what it's going to be until you actually get a chance to rip open that present, rip open that package, whatever the case might be. Now, talking about the Lions, when we have Brad Holmes, we've kind of taken the situation from a hope situation to now it's like, okay, we know we're about to get something good. Like, Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell, the Detroit Lions, they have earned the benefit of the doubt when it comes to this situation because time after time after time after time, they have simply proven that they know what they're looking for. They know what is a good player. They know what is a good fit for them. So it's like, okay, we're not hoping we're going to get something good in the NFL draft. We know we're going to get something good in the NFL draft. Again, we just simply don't know what it's going to be until the freaking announcements are made by whoever's turning in the announcement cards. So, when we think about it from that perspective, that is a very, very fun thing to think about. But again, like I said, it can be excruciating. It can be something where it's like, man, I just really want to know what we're doing here. What is the whole, process here? Now, I will say this, even though we don't know who it's going to be when the Lions turn in their draft cards, their draft picks, that doesn't necessarily mean that Lions fans are not uninformed or that we can't make rational, educated guesses about what the Lions are going to do until the actual moment occurs. Now, Lions fans at this point in time, and I would not even say Lions fans, I would say primarily mostly all NFL fans, is what they're doing is they're focusing on big-time prospects. They're focusing on the guys that are most going to likely be day one, early day two prospects because those are the names that everybody recognizes. Those are the guys that are considered the big names. Those are the guys that are going to get you a lot of recognition talking about them. However, though, when it comes to Lions fans, when it comes to how we look at the draft, while yes, the big-time prospects are fun to talk about, But if there's one thing we know about Brad Holmes is that what makes the draft experience a very amazing and an enjoyable experience is seeing Brad Holmes find great value picks later in the draft, because that is where we shine. That is where the Lions truly make their money. Now, there are definitely players in every single draft year that can fall right into this category. Players that are taken late, that they're considered value picks. They may or may not turn into something good, but there's always one guy, at least every single draft year, where it's like, hey, this guy could potentially be something. He just needs the right coaching. He needs the right culture. He needs the right fit, whatever the case might be. And knowing that that is going to happen every single year, that means that there's always a chance that Brad Holmes is going to find that guy, because those are the types of players that Brad Holmes finds damn near every time. So, who's the guy this year, in my honest opinion, that really kind of falls into that category for Brad Holmes and the Lions this year? Who's that guy who is what I would call a quintessential Detroit Lions, Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell-esque type of player that could really allow Brad Holmes to work his magic this year? To me, the one that really fits that category is a guy that's literally in our own backyard, and that is U of M guard Zach Zinter. Now, I know for some people that is a name they automatically already know. I mean, I'm going to just say this right now. If you're a Detroit Lions fan, chances are you're going to be a fan of either U of M or you're going to be a fan of MSU. Most likely as of late U of M. But either way, you're a fan of both of those ball clubs or ball programs, because those are the two major colleges as far as football in the state of Michigan. Michigan State, U of M, University of Michigan. Those are the two biggest ones. So you already know who those guys are. So like I said, aside from the obvious connection of the fact that Michigan is in the same state as the Detroit Lions, there's definitely, in my opinion, a lot of sensible, logical reasoning that makes good sense as to why the Lions would benefit greatly from having Zinter, from drafting Zinter. First and foremost, let's take a look at the Lions line as it is right now. Obviously, we know we have two great tackles in Taylor Decker and also in Penei Sewell. We know we have a great center in Frank Ragnow. Then we get to the guards. Now, we just signed Graham Glasgow to a 3-year contract extension, and he's not going anywhere anytime soon. We know that for a fact. But we also just brought in from the Baltimore Ravens this offseason Kevin Zeitler, who is supposed to be that guy that is going to be taking over for Jonah Jackson. And Kevin Zeitler is considered one of the best guards in the business. So when you think about it, we have a very, very talented offensive line. I would say, without any sort of meaning to be brash about it or bold about it, we have the best offensive line in the NFL. But that does not necessarily mean that the line doesn't have issues. It doesn't necessarily mean that the Lions' offensive line doesn't have areas of concern. Here's the main concern. Both of the Lions' starting guards are on the north side of 30. And one has to realistically ask the question as far as long-term sustainability for both of these guys. Now, I'm going to say this. For Graham Glasgow, it's a much less serious question, because it's like, hey, we just signed him to a 3-year contract. He's only 31 years old, so he just literally crossed over to the north side of 30. He's still got, in my opinion, plenty of stuff left to work with. He's still got plenty of tread left on the tires, plenty of gas left in the tank. The issue more for me is, what about Zeitler? What about him? The guy's 34 years old, folks, and we just signed him to a 1-year deal. Offensive lineman, that is a position that, just like defensive linemen, linebackers, running backs, it is an extremely physical, demanding position that some guys just simply don't last very long through. So the fact that Zeitler has been doing it for as long as he has, as well as he has, it's a legitimate question to ask how much he's got left. But this is why I love this whole conversation that I'm starting with freaking Zinter. If there's one thing we know about Brad Holmes, is he stated earlier this offseason that there is a commitment to maintaining the offensive line's prowess. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's usually one of two ways. Either you draft immediate replacements to take over in the offensive line or whatever unit you're talking about, The Lions don't need that. They've got all their starters in a good position. So, okay, what's the second way? You draft depth. You draft talent that you can cultivate behind the starters for when it's their turn. And for me, when Holmes insisted about his continued commitment to maintaining the offensive line, Zach Zinter, developing him, drafting him, and putting him behind the likes of Glasgow and Zietler definitely falls right into that category. Because, think about this, folks. You get Zach Zinter and you put him behind those two guys, you're giving him excellent mentorship. You're giving him excellent players who can give him what they have learned through their time in the NFL. Plus, on top of that, we have Hank Fraley as an offensive line coach who was a pretty damn good player in his own right when he used to play. So it's like, listen, between Fraley, Zietler, Glasgow, Zinter would have nothing but absolute great mentorship and coaching from multiple viewpoints. So in my opinion, that right there just makes absolutely perfect sense in my opinion. But you have to think about it also from this perspective. I know that for some Lions fans, and actually I'm going to say quite a few Lions fans, they're instantly going to want to tune out the idea of Zach Zinter because of the fact that he is coming off of a very, very serious injury. Like, they're not going to want to hear this because they're so tired of Brad Holmes going after injured players or players that have a serious injury. And what I'm talking about this is that for those obviously that are U of M fans, they watched the OSU game last year, and Zach Zinter had obviously one of the most serious football injuries that a player can have when he broke his tibia and his fibula on the same play. It's a type of injury that we have seen very, very rarely, but when it happens, it's very serious. The types of players that I'm talking about was when it happened to Joe Theismann, formerly of the Washington Redskins, and I'm talking about Alex Smith when it happened to him. You are talking about a type of injury that for most guys, they are simply not able to come back from. Now, obviously, medical technology being what it is, medical science being what it is, has come a long way to ensure that those types of injuries are not career enders anymore. But it's still a significant injury all the same. However, though, I always refer back to the player a little bit here because the player is a better indicator of knowing where they're at in comparison to what people on the outside do. Zach Zinter himself said at the Combine about a month and a half, almost 2 months ago, that he was at 90% at that time and he feels that he's going to be ready for training camp. Well, let's think about it here. If that's the case, then that's absolutely fantastic in my opinion. That's awesome to hear. But let's think about it from the perspective that what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell are likely going to do. Because the last 2 times they drafted players that had serious injury history, they didn't just throw them straight out there. They let them make sure that, hey, we want to make sure our doctors are clear with this. We want to make sure that everything is good to go before we put you out there on this gridiron that is going to be physically demanding. So for me, it's like, hey, if the Lions follow the same pattern, they're probably going to do the same thing with Zinter if they were to select him that they did with Jamo and they did with Hendon Hooker, which to me, that's totally fine because it's like, as I just stated, unless you're drafting a guy to be an immediate impact player, to be an immediate starter, there's no rush for him to get out on the field. Let him develop, let him grow, let him sit back and learn from the guys that are in front of him, and then when he's fully 100% healthy and there's very little to no risk for him to get hurt again, then you throw him out there. So for me, it's like, again, makes perfect sense there as well. You're able to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. However, though, that's not the end of this conversation with Zinter. We also have to take in consideration that even though Zach Zinter had that injury, that should not discourage or deter Lions fans or the Lions. I'm not saying it's going to because the Lions are very, very, very well set on what they think is a good player regardless of circumstance, unless, in their opinion, there's something else that we don't know. And as far as I know, there really is nothing else to know about Zinter. He's had a major injury, but to me, I still see him as a good prospect. But let's think about his pedigree here. He's coming from U of M, folks. If there's one thing U of M is known for, U of M is an offensive line factory. There are colleges that are known for being producers of a specific position. When it comes to Iowa, they're known as a tight end factory. When it comes to Alabama or Georgia, they're known as running back factories. Well, when it comes to U of M, they are known as an offensive line factory. Think about it. Over the last 3 decades, there have been some really, really damn good offensive linemen that have come out of U of M. And the Lions actually have been benefiting of one of those guys. Think about it. Steve Hutchinson came from U of M. If I recall correctly, he played most of his career with the Seahawks. You got John Runyon, you got John Jansen, you got Taylor Lewan, you got Jake Long, and you have Jeff Backus. All of those are guys that have played and went to U of M, and then all of them had, I would say, at the very least, decent to very successful careers in the NFL as offensive linemen. So if you're coming from U of M and you were already a pretty good offensive lineman there's at least, I would say, a safer bet that that player is going to pan out in the NFL than if he comes from somewhere else. Now, I'm not necessarily saying, if a prospect goes to U of M as an offensive lineman, that's instantaneously a measure of success. No, that's not the way that works. I'm just simply saying, because of the pedigree, because of the history, because of the ability of U of M to give good players that are offensive linemen, it makes it a much safer bet for GMs that are trying to find the best players available at whatever position or whatever, spot in the draft that they're looking for. Which, if there's one thing we know about Brad Holmes, he's always going to go with the best player available mindset. Well, then that leads me into my third point here about Zach Zinter. When you think about Zach Zinter, I look at his and I'm like, okay, he's coming from a good school that's known for giving good offensive linemen. This is a guy that has a chip on his shoulder. He has something to prove. But you also have to consider what his production was in college. You have to understand that if you take that injury situation off the shelves, you take that out of the equation, you are talking about a guy that could very well have been a first-round draft pick almost. Because think about this. Prior to Zinter's injury, he was considered a early day 2 draft prospect. So we're talking like a second-round draft pick. So think about this. Usually when people go to the draft combine and they have their pro days, it's usually going to bring up their draft value a little bit. Well, here's the thing. I have no doubt that because of Zinter's ability to play like he did in college, especially the last 2 years, he probably would have done well enough to where he could have amplified his draft stock, his draft projection up into the late to maybe mid-early first round. Well, think about this. That right there is something that is extremely impressive to me because it's like, hey, we have to take a look at what's going on with the interior offensive linemen of this class. There's not really a whole lot of good ones. There's a few, but it's not a very heavy interior offensive line class for this draft year. It's actually rather light. It's got really slim pickings. But when you take a look at that injury that Zinter had, it substantially impacted his draft stock as he is now considered a day 3 prospect. He's considered a guy that you might be able to justify taking in the 5th round. Maybe the early 4th, maybe the late 4th round, pardon me. But to me, this is where Brad Holmes really cuts his teeth on the rest of the NFL draft. This is where Brad Holmes shows his ability to find great value in players. Because that's what makes Zach Zinter a perfect, quintessential fit for Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell's lines. Again, think about it. This guy is considered a very, very gritty offensive lineman. He is a very gritty, very tough offensive lineman. He's also talented. He's a hard worker. And as I said, he's got something to prove because there's a lot of doubts. There's a lot of concerns about whether or not he's able to play at the NFL level because of his injury. Pardon me, but I'm just going to simply say this. You take a look at all those little steps, those little points that I put in there, they're like ingredients for baking a cake. Zinter literally falls right into what is a type of quintessential Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, Detroit Lions gritty player. He has all of the earmarks that you're looking for. So to me, that again checks off yet another series of boxes. But I also want to remind some Lions fans that, listen, just because Zinter is coming off of a major injury and they're not keen about drafting him, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. Think about this, folks. There have been several instances that I can think of over the last, 2-3 decades of where guys have gotten drafted that had serious injury risks. They had serious injury concerns, but because the team believed in them and they decided to take a risk, they got a big reward out of it too. Now, the guys that I'm talking about are guys that either had to wait a whole year before they got a chance to start, or they were able to come in and play right away, but again, there was still that lingering question. Guys like Rob Gronkowski, who had back injury concerns from college. Jeffrey Simmons, who was coming off an ACL tear when he was coming out of college as a defensive lineman. Landon Dickerson, who had an ACL tear, who then wound up being a great pick for the freaking team that he went to. Trey Smith, who was a 6th-round draft pick by the Chiefs, has wound up being one of their better offensive linemen. Willis McGahee, he got injured 3 months prior prior to him getting drafted by the Bills, he wound up having almost 10,000 yards rushing as a running back. And then you have Troy Polamalu. The year he got drafted, he was considered the best safety in the draft, but there were concussion concerns because of all the times he'd been concussed in college. But yet, the Steelers, they made a trade up to go and get him, and some people were concerned about it, and then now you're looking at Troy Polamalu as not only one of the greatest safeties of all time, but the guy's a Hall of Famer. All I'm simply trying to say is this. For these players that came out of college with injury concerns, they were able to prove that regardless of the injury concerns, that they were still good once they got in, or are good, because some of these guys are playing right now. My whole point is this, is that, yes, it is a risked investment, but for some people, it's worth the investment to see if you're right. Now, I'm not saying it always works out, because there are times where players have been drafted that had injury concerns, and it's totally tanked on the teams that drafted them. I'm just simply saying, the Lions have seemed to shown that, hey, they're not going to let an injury concern necessarily deter them from drafting potential players. They drafted Hendon Hooker. They drafted Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams just last year showed that if given a chance to be a full-time starter, he could really be something. We don't really know what we're going to get in Hendon Hooker because it looks like Jared Goff is going to be here long-term. So it's like, again, Hendon Hooker is looking more like a primary backup piece that is going to get his chance to start probably somewhere else. Not getting into that with this episode, but that's my whole point. And then the final thing I want to talk about with Zach Zinter here is what he did in college as a guard compared to other guard prospects. Because again, there's not a lot of options in this draft as far as great starting interior offensive linemen. The pickings are a little slim. But if you take a look at how Zach Zinter compared against the rest of the guards that are in the NCAA in 2022 and in 2023, you take a look at his overall grades from PFF. In 2022, he was the 63rd best guard out of 706 graded guards in the entirety of the college ranks in 2022. He had a 73.7 overall blocking grade. That was the top 9% of college prospects in 2022. You then go to 2023, he went from 73.7 to 76.6. He was graded 28 out of 678 prospects. He then went to the top 4% of all guards in the NCAA ranks. You're talking about a guy that for the last 2 years, injured or not, was one of the best guards in the freaking NCAA ranks. I think that merits you taking a look at him. I think that merits you saying, hey, let's give this guy a chance. Oh, and as a side note here, I took a look at this too. Zach Zinter, in the entire time that he was in college, only gave up 2 sacks as a guard. Guards are not necessarily known for being pass blockers. They're more usually they're more typically used as run blockers. But this guy has shown that not only can he be a good run blocker, he can be a good pass blocker as well. So for me, it's like, okay, this guy clearly has something to offer. This guy clearly knows what it's like to play as a guard, and I believe that he could definitely fit what the Lions are needing as far as that next potential person to come in and be another anchor for that offensive line for long-term success. That's why I present to you Zach Zinter as somebody that I would pay very close attention to come draft night. I think the Lions could definitely decide to call the U of M prospect because, again, we just got Aiden Hutchinson from U of M a couple of years ago. Graham Glasgow, a guard, is from U of M. Imagine that connection between those two guys. I'm just simply saying it could very well happen. But anyway, folks, I decided to put this episode together so that way you guys could enjoy it, that way you guys could think about it. I know for some people this is definitely going to be one that it's going to take a little bit of convincing on. But regardless, I just wanted to do it because I'm truly bought into this guy being something special potentially. And I think the circumstances are right for him here in Detroit. But with that having been said, I'm going to end the episode, and I just want to say to everybody, thank you all once again for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all to do one of these 3 things: like, comment, and subscribe. If by chance you subscribed in the past and you did so way back when and forgot to do so then, or you just subscribed and not had a chance to do so, again, I highly encourage y'all to subscribe. We're literally almost to 6,000 subscribers, folks. Let's get it done. But I also want to encourage y'all to turn on the bell notification icon that is right next to that subscribe button, so that way you never miss any more content that I push out. Again, subscription numbers are always going up, but we want to keep not only that going up, but you guys turning on the notification icon, so that way as soon as I push something out, you guys know about it and can come right back into the streams. With that, I also encourage you all to please share this content with your Lions friends and family members. Share it here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share it anywhere and everywhere you can with everybody and anybody that you can. The more we share it, the greater the channel spreads, the greater the channel grows. And with that being said, folks, I just want to again say thank you all for watching the content. I hope you all enjoyed the content. I hope you all have something that makes you happy. I hope you all have something that makes you smile. And with that being said, to everybody, I just want to say God bless. And until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.